The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday, March 8th. I hope everybody is having a fantastic time, fantastic weekend, beginning of a weekend. We are going to discuss America First. Yes, make America first again. America First, a foreign policy, not as Donald Trump or his various mouthpieces or MAGA think of it, but what would it really look like? I think America First was even a term maybe Ayn Rand used, but it's definitely the right perspective for a foreign policy for America. Right? It shouldn't be the French foreign policy. That should be French first. So we want to look at what that would entail. And today's show is sponsored by Troy, Australian Troy, who's been such a phenomenal supporter of the Yaron Brook Show. And he's got a few questions just to get me going, but basically he's left it up to me. But he's asking, what does it mean? How does one operationalize, if you will, a self-interested foreign policy? What does it imply in terms of the actions one must take in terms of other world governments and aid, U.S. aid, particularly in the context of USAID? So we are going to look at all of that, and I will tell you what I think and what I think the right kind of America First foreign policy should be and how it should be oriented. For other countries, it's going to be slightly different. There's going to be a different emphasis, a different focus, to a large extent because there is a uniqueness to being a country with as rich as the United States is, and as powerful as the United States is. We have the largest, most powerful military force in human history, and that means we can do things other countries can't. And that is significant. Other countries might not be able to stand up for their interests in quite the way that the United States can, but the principles are going to be the same. All right, so that is what we're going to be talking about today. As always, the Super Chat is open, and I encourage you to ask questions, not only because that is a way to support the show, which is amazing, but also because it is a way for you to ask questions. And this is a big topic. I think I'll be able to cover it today, but a big topic with lots of concrete applications. So what I'm really interested in is a lot of questions around this topic, a lot of questions about the concrete applications, a lot of questions about what should we do with X, what should we do with Y, how would you treat this, how would you treat that. Happy to take all those questions. It will help make sure that I kind of do a thorough job in covering every aspect of the topic. And as I said, it's a big topic. There's a lot to cover. And of course, you can ask me about Gavin Newsom if you want, Liam. But priority will be given to those who ask about the topic we are talking about. And if you are on a different platform like X or Twitter, as it's called, you can come over to YouTube and ask questions over there. So feel free to do that. All right, let's jump in. So what does it mean to say that America's foreign policy should be self-interested? And that is my position, and that is the objectivist position. America's foreign policy should be self-interested. But what does that mean? What constitutes this self-interest of America as represented by its government? For that, we have to ask the question of what is the responsibility, what is the role, what is the purpose of government? That is, what is government instituted to do? And of course, I think most of you know the objectivist answer to that. The role of the government is to protect the individual rights of Americans, of citizens and residents within America. And, maybe that's more expansive for citizens, less expansive for residents. But generally, it's to protect the lives and property of the people who live in America. That is the job of government. That is what a self-interested government means. That's what American interests are from the perspective of the government. The government has zero zilch, no responsibility in any way to tell you what your interests are, to dictate to you what your interests are. It should in no way hamper your ability to pursue your values, as long as, of course, you are not infringing on other people's rights and other people's freedoms. So the job of the American government is to secure freedom. And in foreign policy, for Americans. And in foreign policy, that is what the government is there to do, to secure the freedom of Americans. In other words, to secure the ability of Americans to not have their rights violated, to live, i.e. they shouldn't be killed, and their property should be protected. So what is that? How do we apply this principle? What does that actually mean? Notice the U.S. government's interests are not to secure the freedoms of other people, unless the freedom of other people is necessary for the freedom of Americans, and we can think maybe there's scenarios in which that's true. The job of the government, U.S. government, is not to bring democracy to the world. It's not to be the world's policeman. It's not to cure every disease in the world out there, even if it can. The job of the U.S. government is to protect the interests of the American people, which means to protect the lives and property of the American people. And that's what we have a military for. And that's what we have a foreign policy for. Now, what does this imply? That is, what actions, what behaviors, how would we treat foreign governments, for example, if we took such a position? Well, I would say, and I've said this in the past, I've covered this in past programs, that the United States should have a strategy, and a foreign policy strategy. I don't think the United States has had a foreign policy strategy, at least since World War II. And I'm skeptical whether it had one even before that. That's why it got kind of roped into World War II without expecting it. It got roped into World War I without expecting it. It's like the U.S. is reactive. It does not have an actual strategy. So the United States should have a strategy. It should define the threats to U.S. lives and property. Is there anybody who is a threat to invade the United States? If so, who are they? Is there anybody who is likely to kill Americans? For example, these could be regimes. It could be terrorists. Is anybody likely to, in large scale, steal Americans' stuff? Pirates, for example, on the high seas. Are there regimes out there who are likely to support the pirates, the terrorists, the countries that might invade the United States? And of course, invasion is not the only thing today. Are there any countries that might launch missiles into the United States, whether nuclear or regular? But are there any countries out there that have the capacity and are inclined to attack the United States physically? And I think you need to do an assessment of the world, and what is the likelihood that any particular government would do any of these things? And to do that, I would suggest basically thinking about the world in terms of categorizing every country in the world based on three parameters, or into three categories. Categorizing everybody into three categories. One, the good guys, friends or potential friends. And here you would categorize countries as basically free countries, countries that are basically have a respect for rights, property rights and otherwise, countries that are not, do not, invade their neighbors, are not hostile to their neighbors, have not engaged in military adventurism, call it, have not funded terrorist groups, have not funded pirates and organized criminals. Yeah, countries like, as Jennifer points out, Canada or Western Europe, or Israel, or, in Australia, Thailand. I don't know. You could come up with different countries, India potentially. You can come up with different countries around the world who basically exhibit those characteristics, and they're not going to be perfect. We know that we're not perfect, but certainly many of these countries are not going to be perfect, but who are in the right direction, leaning, moving presently in the direction of liberty. Then a second group of countries is a group of countries that is not free, clearly not free. They are unfree countries, and these are countries that might have kings or might have dictators or might have all kinds of different authoritarian regimes, but they do not constitute a threat to the United States. This could be because they're too small. It could be because they're just not interested. They might constitute a threat to their neighbors in a particular region, but as of today, they have no ambitions towards the United States. I mean, you could think of this as, I don't know, Vietnam is an authoritarian regime that is not a threat to the United States. There are probably a lot, most of Africa, or a lot of Africa, authoritarian regimes, but don't pose a threat to the United States. And so these are not friends, but not enemies. And then a third category is regimes that are not free and potential or real enemies of the United States. These are regimes that are aggressive, that have the inclination or the potential to attack the United States or to disrupt the ability of the United States to trade or the ability of the United States to pursue its interests in the world. So certainly countries like, right now, countries like Iran and Russia, North Korea, which keeps threatening the United States with its ballistic missiles. You'd have to think, and you'd have to figure out if China qualifies or not. But maybe China, at least certainly potentially, they have nukes, and they can certainly reach the United States, and they have threatened interests of the United States. But whether they actually are a risk to the lives and property of Americans, that's the kind of analysis you would have to do, and that's the kind of thinking you'd have to do from the perspective of a foreign policy. You'd have to, the people in charge have a lot more information about China's intention than I do. There are not a lot of countries like this, by the way. There might be others. I don't know, Yemen, because they have the Houthis, and the Houthis have obviously attacked U.S. shipping. You've got terrorist organizations all over the world, and then you've got governments who support the terrorist organizations. So ISIS, Al Qaeda, and many of their offshoots. And in that, you'd have to say, well, is Qatar an enemy of the United States, given that they support these groups? They house these groups. Hamas is housed in Qatar. Syria houses these groups, and Syria's in the midst of change. Is it an enemy? Is it not an enemy? Clearly, it's not a free country. You'd have to evaluate, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Pakistan's an interesting case that you'd have to really think about. And it's a nuclear power, so it has nukes, and potentially could fall into the hands of Islamists, maybe already supports Islamists. Again, you'd have to do the intelligence and figure out who's who. And then generally, I would say this. The first group, the group of friends, should be declared as such. I think that is a group that you have full diplomatic relations with. You cooperate on stuff. You have treaties. You might even have a UN of free countries. And you work together on issues that relate, or maybe even have, you could even imagine certain defense treaties or all kinds of other arrangements between free countries. That would be pursuing America's self-interest to have those agreements, because there's an advantage of having, other people scanning the world for enemies and helping us if we do get in trouble. The second group, I do not believe that one should have diplomatic relations with. It doesn't mean one is hostile towards. And certainly in terms of trade should be completely open with such countries. And there should be no restrictions on trade or movement. But for example, American businesses should come to understand that if you do business in these countries, the American government cannot guarantee your safety, and these regimes are not regimes that can be trusted, and your property could be confiscated, and depending on the circumstances, there is a real possibility that the United States government will not come and protect it, because you have been warned. These are dangerous countries. Don't go in and work with them. They are not free. That means something. That's a designation that has significance and it has meaning. And you should expect from your own people an understanding of what that means and how that, what that implies, and that they should behave accordingly. They should be careful when traveling and engaging and doing business with countries like that. When Freeman says, Yaron, don't go to Russia. Not going to Russia, don't worry. But, I have been to Russia, which most of my critics cannot say, and I've been to Ukraine, which most of my critics cannot say. So that's the second category. The third category, I think there it really depends. Let me just give you a couple of examples of the second category that I think is meaningful. So for example, Cuba. Cuba, in my view, is in the second category. Cuba does not pose a threat to America. It is not going to invade Florida. It did during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that's gone. And, there's some reason to believe that they're working with the Chinese, and you'd have to get intelligence on that and everything. But Cuba, qua Cuba, independent of China and Russia, is not a threat to the United States. And therefore, we should not have an embargo on it. We should allow Americans to trade with Cuba, even though we should discourage it. And we should, again, tell them you engage with Cuba at your own risk. The same thing is true of Venezuela. As much as I hate Venezuela and the regime there, and I don't hate Venezuela, I hate the regime of Venezuela, they're not a threat to the United States. Now, again, there's an argument to be made, and I'm open to it, and this is the kind of debate you would have in foreign policy. If Venezuela is being used by organizations like Hezbollah to train fighters who might one day then engage in a battle with the United States or be destroying U.S. interests overseas, then maybe Venezuela, because it is a base for such terrorist organizations, becomes in the enemy or potential enemy category. So again, you have to really know the concretes. You have to know what's going on. You have to have proper intelligence and really figure it out and have a policy. Now, what is the third category? The third category, I'd say you would divide into two. There are enemies, people who are, in a sense, at war with the United States right now. Threatening to launch missiles, killing Americans overseas, doing things like that. And I think there are, probably 3 countries like that in the world: Iran and North Korea and Russia, that are clearly engaged in acts of violence. Now, Russia Ukraine is not America. Russia is not directly engaged in violence against America, although it has taken a few Americans hostage and so on. But, they shouldn't have been there to begin with, is my view at this point. So with regard to Iran and North Korea, they are enemies. Now, my view is enemies need to be destroyed. I think Afghanistan was in the same category. They need to be destroyed. They shouldn't be tolerated. They need to be defeated. So my view of Iran, and certainly if it's possible, that is, they don't have nukes, and, it's not that hard, then, it's obvious that the United States should take out the North Koreans and the Iranians. Now, the North Koreans are a little trickier because they have nukes, so you'd have to figure out how to do it without allowing them to launch those nukes. I don't know if it's possible. I'm assuming it is. Take them out. Take out that regime. Unify the Korean Peninsula. Certainly take out Iran. Replace that regime. That would be in American self-interest. They are a threat to the lives and property of America. A real threat, not a hypothetical, not a potential. They've killed Americans. They say they will kill Americans. They're actively developing weapons to kill Americans. They need to be stopped. Stopped cold. Russia is a potential enemy, but it has not attacked the United States or its allies in treaty, but it has, through invading Ukraine, made clear their offensive, imperialistic intentions. And therefore, they're certainly a potential enemy, real potential enemy of the United States. I think, by the way, with the first two, at the very least, before you stop them, at the very least, your self-interest requires that you not trade with them. So those are countries that should be embargoed completely. Russia is not a country you want to go to war with because they have nukes. And it is a country that poses a threat. So you have to figure out ways in which to deal with Russia, given the fact that it's a threat. But it is not, you're not going to go directly to war with them. And I'd say there are two things that should be done with Russia, given its, engaging in war. I think one is you should boycott it completely, no trade, 100% cut off from all trade with the United States and its allies. And second, we should wholeheartedly support those who fight against them because they're a potential enemy to the extent that they can be weakened dramatically. They will become less of an enemy. We know what they want. They want to go after our allies. They want to go after people we have a defense treaty with. We must stop them. Now, in a different world in which we were not members of NATO, in which Europe was responsible for the security of Europe, maybe it would just be Europeans who would do this. But given the world in which we live, absolutely legitimate to fully arm the Ukrainians, not to put American troops on the ground, but to fully arm the Ukrainians to do whatever they can to degrade Russia's military capabilities. That is fully in America's interest. And the same is true of Israel. Israel is fighting an enemy that the United States should be fighting, an enemy of the United States, that is Islamic totalitarianism, Islamism. And as such, we should support Israel in its military fight, in its ability to destroy our enemies. Now, in this case, given 9/11, given all the terrorism since 9/11, we should destroy them ourselves. And going after Iran would do a lot towards that. Going after Qatar would do a lot towards that, and it wouldn't cost that much. And it might be actually cheaper for Americans to just get it done with than to keep supporting Israel with ongoing endless wars. If America did it, it would end. Hamas wouldn't exist, Hezbollah wouldn't exist, because they depend on support from places like Iran and Qatar. And if that goes away, and if America asserts itself, there is no Hamas, there is no Hezbollah to worry about. So a real self-interested foreign policy would have America do it, annihilate its enemies, and then it wouldn't need to support Israel. I do not believe the United States should give $1 to Israel other than to fight a common enemy. But if that fight is over, Israel gets zero. Zilch, nada. So, and then you get China, which is difficult to categorize. It is not engaged in military action against the United States. It has not yet engaged in military action against any of the United States' allies. It has not yet invaded Taiwan, although it does threaten to do so. It has not invaded Japan, and it doesn't threaten. It has not invaded South Korea. It's not stopped shipping from various countries of goods to the United States. It has not prevented U.S. ships travel from the U.S. to various places in Asia. So it is definitely a country in which I don't think we should have diplomatic relations. It's not a free country. But it's not a country I think we should embargo. It's a country we should watch carefully. We should continue to assess that when does it go from a potential enemy to an actual enemy. And if it goes and becomes an actual enemy, then it is completely appropriate to embargo their goods and to eliminate trade with them and to start preparing for war. An invasion of Taiwan potentially could be something that moved them from one category to the next. So again, what is the standard? America's interest. What are America's interest? The protection of American life and property. Not American interest in the sense of we want American corporations to rule the world, and therefore we're going to hamper the ability of other countries to their businesses to rule, to trade. Not beef up production or have some vision of how the U.S. economy should be structured in the future, and therefore, and try to manipulate through trade policy what gets built in America and what doesn't. No. How do we protect the lives and property of Americans? Period. So, one of the questions Troy asks is, what should America do about really just horrendous regimes around the world? Like Iraq with Saddam Hussein, I don't know, like the genocide in that's going on right now in Sudan, or when the Houthis and the Tutsis slaughtered each other and 2 million people died. Should America intervene? Should it stop horrific regimes, the Khmer Rouge, whatever, from doing what they do to their people, to their neighbors? And my answer to that is no, as brutal as that might be. You cannot expect, and you shouldn't expect, and we have no duty to sacrifice our lives and our treasure for the sake of somebody else's freedom. And again, the only reason I think we should support Ukraine is, one, it is tilting towards the West significantly, and two, it faces a country that is a potential real enemy of the United States. So, Iraq, Saddam Hussein killed his own people left and right. He was in war for 8 years with Iran. I think the United States should have stayed out of it completely. Iraq was not funding terrorism against the United States. Iran was, but Iraq wasn't. There was no self-interested reason to go to Iraq. There was no self-interested reason for an American soldier to die in Iraq fighting for Iraqis. If Iraq wants to be free, Iraqis need to make it free. The job of the United States is to preserve the freedom of Americans. And Iraq was not impinging on that freedom. Now, you could argue about the 1991 war, if the United States should have gone and liberated Kuwait. Did we have a strategic interest there? Were American lives in danger because of the oil fields? Is oil a strategic value such that we should preserve it? We have a defense treaty implicit, I think, not explicit, but implicit, with Saudi Arabia. Should that really be? And I'm skeptical about whether we should have gone. I'm skeptical about whether we should be protecting the Saudis. Right. But, those are kind of borderline cases where you have to think it through. And I think because of the strategic importance of oil, particularly in those days when America didn't quite pump as much. But how much worse would it be for America if Saddam Hussein, conquered Kuwait and then conquered Saudi Arabia instead of the kings of Saudi Arabia? Does that really make a difference to the lives and property of Americans? Probably not. Probably not. It would be awful. A lot of people die. But probably not America's interest. So, you go to war only when the lives of Americans are at stake, only in protecting, just like everything else. Violence can only be used in self-defense. So somebody is a real legitimate threat. They're building nukes and they're saying they're going to use it against you. That's a legitimate threat. Take them out. They've got nukes. And they keep saying they're going to launch missiles into Canada, into California, that is North Korea. That's a legitimate threat. You've got a regime that has ambitions of empire over much of Europe. And you have a treaty to defend that, Europeans. That's a legitimate threat. You got to deal with it. Wanda Freeman says Iraq was useful as a launch pad for dealing with Iran. No, it wasn't, because we never launch padded into Iran. We did nothing with regard to Iran. So Iraq was just a waste of American lives, nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing was achieved. Indeed, quite the opposite. Iraq became an Iranian satellite and allowed Iran to expand its reach all the way to Lebanon. Now Israel has taken that away, and the change in Syria has taken that away. But it never was the intention of the Bush administration to go to Iran. Never, ever was their intention to go to Iran. They really believed that they would build a democracy in Iraq and it would be a model for the Middle East, and they would change the Middle East that way. That's nuts. Note that none of this is consistent with the way Trump views America first. There is no sense of individual rights, none. There's no sense of protecting the lives and property of Americans. There certainly is no categorizing foreign countries as free or not free, friendly or not friendly, enemies or not enemies. Quite the contrary. Trump seems to be most friendly with Putin, least friendly with Europe and Canada, of all people. Freedom has no currency for Trump, means nothing for Trump. So there's absolutely no relevance to the fact that Europe is relatively free and Canada is relatively free, and no relevance to the fact that Putin really is a dictator. And this is across the board. There is no foreign policy strategy. And there's no conception of America first, because there's no conception of what America is. There's no conception of what the role of government is. There's no conception of what it means to be America first. It's for Trump and MAGA, America First is some chest-thumping, nationalistic, mindless patriotism. Mindless patriotism. That's all America First means to them. It's not a thought-out, thoughtful strategy about the interest of American citizens. There is no America free, independent of individual citizens. So what America First means is individual citizens first, their rights first, their freedoms first. And part of the chest thumping is territorial expansion. So because America is not an idea, J.D. Vance keeps reminding us of that, America is not an idea. What America is territory, land, blood and soil. So why not expand it? Make America great again is make America bigger. No wonder we want Greenland. Not a great free trade agreement with Greenland. That would solve the problem. Imagine if we had a great free trade agreement with Greenland and American companies could go into Greenland and mine rare earth materials there and send it back to the United States. What do we need to actually occupy Greenland for that? All we need is free trade. Same with Canada. Exactly the same thing. Canada becoming a 51st state. I mean, it keeps going on and on about this. That's just blood and soil expansionism, nothing else. It's not America first, it's America last. Okay, so that's how you deal with other governments. And look, if another government becomes a threat to the United States and you think that by changing the regime in that government, and it's an authoritarian government, you can eliminate the threat to the United States, then regime change is appropriate. I think this idea that we cannot assassinate foreign leaders is ridiculous. So America would take an active position vis-a-vis authoritarians and saying, look, we won't intervene. But if you become a threat to us, we will crush you. There's a song in there. We will crush you. Something like that. And if there are horrific things happening in the world, it's sad. And in some cases, if the U.S. government doesn't object, you can volunteer and go and fight for justice. You can go to Rwanda and to save the, I can't remember who is killing who. I think the Houthis were killing the Tutsis, is that right? Or the Tutsis, the Houthis, whoever, you can go save them. But that is a personal thing. Okay, so let's talk about U.S. aid and how U.S. aid should be. U.S. aid, in a sense, is like welfare. It just should not exist unless there is a clear American interest. That is, the U.S. aid is necessary for the protection of American lives and property. So, for example, U.S. aid to Ukraine and Israel, fighting our enemies. Ukraine in particular, given that we won't fight the enemy directly because of nuclear risk, let Ukraine do it. We should be giving them a lot more aid than we have. U.S. aid to Israel, probably not necessary if America took care of business after 9/11. But it didn't. So we're stuck with a relatively inefficient way to defeat Islamism by using a proxy, which is Israel. But better than not fighting them at all. But what about all the other foreign aid? We give $3 billion to Egypt and $1 billion to Jordan, primarily because we bribed them to sign a peace deal with Israel. We shouldn't do that. Countries shouldn't need a bribe in order to sign a peace deal. And the United States shouldn't be doing the bribing. It should be in Egypt and Jordan's self-interest to have a peace deal with Israel. And if it's not, then they should suffer the consequences. We shouldn't, as a government, we shouldn't be sending food aid. We shouldn't be sending military aid. We send aid to 120-something countries. We also have troops in 130 countries, which is absurd and ridiculous. Now, what about like U.S. aid that is basically preventing the spread of polio, HIV, malaria in different parts of the world? Well, here again, you have to think of what is the life, how are you protecting the lives of Americans? Take HIV, for example. HIV cannot be contracted easily. American interests are not being directly, the lives are not being threatened by HIV ravishing Africa. So while there's no question that USAID in its AIDS program has saved maybe hundreds of thousands of lives, that is not the job of the US government. It could be a fantastic thing for private charities to do. And indeed, the US government can mention that this is happening in Africa and encourage private charities to do it, not with with subsidies or anything like that, but just by saying so. But there is literally no threat to America of HIV spreading in Africa. I mean, there's some marginal small risk. But again, to get AIDS requires, it doesn't just require breathing. Malaria is the same way. The spread of malaria in Africa does not threaten Americans. And therefore, the American government, qua government, has no business funding malaria programs. I mean, Bill Gates funds a lot of malaria programs. And that is, to his credit. I guess, if that's his values, right? Charity is fine. So to the extent that individuals want to engage in charity to help prevent diseases in different countries and save people's lives, fine. If they're doing it for the right reasons, good for them. And yet, there's certainly value in saving people's lives. Now, I don't know enough about polio to know if polio qualifies or not. Again, a lot of the work on polio is being done by people like Bill Gates. So I don't think the government money is necessary or needed. Now, if it's a easily communicable disease, travels easily, is easily, you can easily get infected, and you can get on a plane and travel to the US and easily infect Americans with it, then yeah, you could imagine that you could argue that there is a direct, the CDC, the same entity that would deal with pandemics in the United States, has an interest in going out there and preventing certain diseases from developing and getting to the point where they're a threat to the US. I think that's a legit argument. You would have to clearly identify what the diseases are and what the threat they pose to the United States is and how they're transmitted and all of this. You'd have to do the hard work like everything else. But that is it. Every single piece of aid should be directly related to getting rid of, reducing, eliminating a direct threat to the lives of Americans. In America, we're not trying to cure malaria so Americans can go on safari. Right? And of course, you have vaccines for a lot of these things. So, if Americans got vaccinated, then they wouldn't be at risk for a lot of these diseases. So aid, I would shut down USAID completely. Certainly, the State Department or the Defense Department should have some pool of money to deal with specific situations in which, spending money could prevent a war which the United States would be involved in, or spending money could prevent a disease from spreading to the United States, or spending money. They should have a pool to be able to do that, but it would have to be on an ad hoc basis related to real threats. All right. So again, interests. Interests are not. Yeah, it's our hemisphere, and we want everybody to be good guys in our hemisphere, to like America in our hemisphere. That's not interests. The interests of the government relate only to American citizens, protecting their freedom, protecting their rights. So we have no direct interest in what regime is in Chile, unless Chile is going to align with China and put nuclear weapons in Chile to threaten the U.S. I don't know. You can imagine a scenario where it becomes a threat. All right? Then it becomes a threat. And if we believe that they're going to do that, we could preempt it. Absolutely. But no, just going in and intervening in these countries and shooting up regimes and in the name of we want freedom, not America's job, shouldn't get involved. That is way too broad a definition of interest. Lives and significant property. That's it. When Iran and Arab countries nationalized oil, a strategic asset, a necessary strategic asset, that was confiscated from American private companies by these governments should America intervene. Yes, that was a direct interest. That was a direct attack on property owned by Americans and of strategic interest to American citizens that help preserve their freedom. But there are not a lot of those kind of things. Not a lot of those kind of things. The fact that American industry has certain interests, unless they are as strategic as oil, they should have never gone there. So, American interest, according to the foreign policy realists, is way too broad of a term. And according to isolationists, way too narrow of a term. And I'm not saying I have all the answers. One has to really think about particular cases. What happens if a free country, in which Americans have invested heavily in, suddenly becomes authoritarian, and all the assets that Americans invested in it when it was okay to invest in it because it was free are now going to be confiscated? Does that constitute an American interest in protecting the property of Americans? Yeah, probably. Under the right circumstances, yeah, it could. What kind of action does that necessitate? It would depend on the circumstances. So again, none of this is easy, straightforward. You can plug it into a formula and it comes out. You have to think it through. Does the country have nuclear weapons? Could we put pressure on the country through sanctions, through an embargo to get them to at least compensate American citizens for their property? What can we do? Do we have to invade? Probably not. Could we eliminate the regime at a low cost and return them to freedom in order to preserve the assets of the Americans? Maybe, and maybe it's justified in that case. So again, complicated. That's life. You have to be able to take principles, which is what I've given you, and apply them to the various concretes in the world out there, which is not necessarily easy. All right, I hope that this gives you a little bit of an illustration, the extent to which this is not the policy of America First today, of MAGA and Trump. By the way, one of the principles is you do not negotiate with an enemy. You do not negotiate with an enemy. Not if you're strong. Now, if you're weak, you might not have any option but to negotiate. But if you're strong, You do not negotiate. You do not negotiate with evil. So you do not negotiate with Iran. You do not negotiate and suck up to North Korea. You do not negotiate with Putin. There's just no talking. There's no discussion. Unless you're on the verge of a nuclear war and this is the only way to get everybody to calm down. So deals are not the standard. Deals are not good. Peace is not a good in and of itself. Peace with whom and for what? And there is no such thing as some kind of amorphous American interest. It doesn't exist. The CIA and the NSA, I challenged the NSA. NSA said we listen to drug cartels in Mexico. Drug cartels are not a security threat to the United States. NSA should not be listening to them. NSA also listens to the oil company in Brazil because they want to give an edge to American businesses in terms of oil pricing. That is not in the interest of Americans. It's not protecting the lives and property of Americans. So American intelligence services and American military are used in a variety of different ways all over the world. That have nothing to do with the individual rights, interests of Americans. The NSA is probably listening now. As I said, I've been to the NSA, discussed this with them. So they know my views. So it's the problem when you don't define interests, that everything is an American interest. That's how we intervene everywhere in the world. There's no limit to it. We sacrifice American troops. We sacrifice American lives. We sacrifice a lot of treasure because it's in American, quote, interests. This is why interests need to be defined. I defined it as the lives and property, of significance, the lives and significant property of Americans. That's it. All right, so that is my view of America First strategy. Ayn Rand was very clear America should have never been in Vietnam. It had no interest in Vietnam. Northern Vietnam was never a threat to the United States. Its victory did not constitute a violation of rights of American citizens. Not involve the confiscation of any substantial American property. We should have never been in Korea. As good as it might have turned out for the Koreans that we were, and that South Korea is blossoming, we should have never been there. Korea, the Chinese, the Russians taking over the entire Korean Peninsula did not pose a direct threat to the United States. There are a lot of we should never been in Iraq. We should have never gone to the First World War. So we should have never got into the American-Spanish War and taken the Philippines and Puerto Rico, where I'm now right now, and Cuba. None of that should have happened. All of that was in the name of these ambiguous American interests. But in the 1890s, it was motivated by imperialism. Later on, it was motivated by bringing peace to the world, being the world's policeman, all kinds of motivations that have anything to do with America's interests. So those are some examples of things that should not have done. And we should not be the welfare provider for the rest of the world. Even though I don't think USAID was the first thing you would shut down in the government, I think there are much more egregious, horrible things that the government does than USAID, it ultimately should have been shut down. Now, if you want to understand Ayn Rand's perspective on American interest and what Americanism is and what America First is, there are essays where she talks about foreign policy in Capitalism, Not an Ideal, and some of her other essay books. But one important source is the textbook on Americanism, and her essay on Americanism in that textbook, including other people's essays, including mine, which you can find at Amazon. That is a great textbook. Thank you, Jonathan, for editing it. Thank you for supporting the show. That is a great source to understand what Ayn Rand meant when she talked about America, the value of America, what Americanism as an ism actually means. All right. So again, thank you, Troy, for the opportunity to talk about this. Thank you for sponsoring today's show. Let me know what you thought, what you think. And if there are additional questions, happy to do another show on this where I answer particular questions that maybe I didn't cover this time. All right, let's jump in. Reminder, we have goals even on Saturdays for the show. Right now, we're about $50 short of our goal for the first hour. So, a couple of $20 questions and a $10 question would cover that. We've got quite a few $5 and $10 questions. What we need now are $20 and $50 questions to get us for the first hour. And then, of course, there is a second hour. So please consider supporting the show. Consider jumping in with a question. And, of course, you can do a sticker. We've got a lot of people watching right now. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. And if you have never supported the show, please, or have, but would like to do some more, please consider doing a sticker like Catherine did. Catherine Steger did. She did a small amount, but it's great. She did just over €1. You can, a euro's great. $1's great. 2, 5, 10, 500. Can't do more than 500. But any amount, please consider supporting the show and getting us to our targets so that the show, which is supported by listeners like you, made possible by listeners like you, can continue. All right. Let's see. Yes, we've got a $50 from Brazil, Q2 Santos. Trump's shift towards U.S. isolation reduces growth by harming competitiveness, limits innovation by restricting global trade, weakens alliances by fueling conflict between free nations, empowers authoritarian regimes by enabling coercion. Yes, but that's just the beginning of it. I mean, the biggest problem with Trump's move towards U.S. isolation is that it constitutes a massive violation of American individual rights. So it is Americans that he is hurting more than anything else. He's hurting Americans by restricting their ability to buy whatever they want to buy, by employing whoever they want to employ. He's restricting Americans' freedom by turning the world against America and making it such that Americans are not going to be welcome in big chunks of the world. American investment, but even American tourism. And he is harming the U.S. economy, which hurts Americans individually. I mean, we heard our, Commerce Secretary or Treasury Secretary say, yeah, Americans, it's not part of the American dream to buy cheap products. He wants to make products more expensive. Artificially, which is a violation of our rights. I should be able to buy products at whatever price the market will bear. None of your business. Stay out of it. Stop taxing it. So I agree with you completely. It harms competitiveness, which harms producers and consumers. It limits innovation. And it hurts our allies, which, again, is a violation of the individual rights of Americans. Alliances are there to protect us. Weakened alliances mean we are less protected, which means our enemies are stronger and can hurt us more. Hurt us means hurt whom? Hurt individual Americans. And maybe most importantly, it empowers, as you say, Santos, it empowers authoritarian regimes by enabling them, legitimizing them, sanctioning them, and emboldening them. And that could have just horrific consequences in the United States. Trump is leading us to World War III faster than any other president. Trump is leading us to World War III faster than any other president by exuding weakness and by being so thoroughly unprincipled, and by sanctioning and supporting and promoting the worst authoritarian dictators in the world. People thought Biden was driving us towards World War III. Trump is that on steroids, in spades. All right, Michael. Donald Trump will go down in history as the first American president to have willingly betrayed his own country. In service of a foreign enemy. His acts of treason will be taught in history books by generations to come. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there have been other really, really bad presidents. Woodrow Wilson got us into World War I for no real reason. A lot of Americans died as a consequence of that, and did a lot of bad things domestically as well. So there have been others that have done horrific things. But yes, I think this is going to go down. Just the first 40 days are going to go, 45 days are going to go down as some of the worst in all of American history in terms of what the president has done. And he is up there now with some of the worst presidents ever. Normative Randoid. Wow. Should the president be able to deploy military without a declaration from Congress first? Additional thoughts on the War Powers Act? No, he should not. Now, you could imagine, given the speed at which things move in the world today, that American president would have to deploy some military force quickly and assertively in order to prevent a catastrophe without going to Congress first. But he should immediately get congressional authorization as quickly as feasible. If there is an imminent threat and secrecy is not an issue, then he should convene Congress immediately to vote to authorize the use of force. If that is not possible, then you use the force to mitigate the immediate threat. But before you start acting in order to eliminate the threat completely, you've got to get Congress's authorization to go to war. So the Constitution is pretty clear where the authority lies. The authority lies with Congress, not with the president. And we have seen, just like with immigration and with tariffs, we have seen Congress abrogate its responsibility. It started, I think, with the Vietnam War, and basically let the president get away with anything. I think that is wrong, despicable. And anyway, so I definitely do not like the idea that the president could just kill anybody, have approval to do whatever he wants to do, and no counterbalance. This indefinite declaration of war, even after 9/11, which allowed the U.S. to, the U.S. presidents to basically engage in military activities without any limitation. But generally, the U.S. has not declared war in a long time, particularly before military action. All right, Daniel came in with 50 Canadian dollars. There's still such a thing as Canadian dollars. There's still not the 51st state. Daniel says, Canadian business owner here. Our number one supplier is based in California. They make products using components from Europe. They get tariffed coming into the United States. Canada hits them again, coming to me. None of these policies are targeted, just rights violation. Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, you know, there's more and more and more of that all over the world because we're such a, I mean, it's a beautiful thing that the global economy is so well integrated. And ideally, everybody just dropped tariffs to zero. It would be a lot if just America dropped tariffs to zero. But this is one of the, why NAFTA is so good. At least for many goods, I don't know if your product, but for many goods, tariffs between Canada and the United States are indeed zero. And that's a beautiful thing. America has benefited from it. Canada has benefited from it. Mexico has benefited enormously from it. And this is what Trump is trying to undo, a system that's actually working. If anything, we should be insisting that more things have zero tariffs. Instead, Trump is leading the world towards a situation where there's more and more and more and more and more tariffs. And you know, it's hard to see how this ends because it just goes. Nobody in politics, at least, has an incentive to make it stop. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate the support. And yeah, sorry, your goods. I mean, imagine how many tariffs are embedded in the iPhone. How much cheaper this would be without all the different tariffs. I think the pieces of the iPhone are made in 50 different countries, 50. And many times when they're crossing borders, there's a tax as they move back and forth. Horrible. A friend of Aristotle. My vision of a commerce department would be to make sure state laws do not impede interstate trade, and to advise foreign nations on laws that do not impede international trade with the U.S. Thoughts? Yeah, although I don't think that's a full-time job. So I don't think you need a Commerce Department. It could be a department within the Treasury that basically advised foreign nations and kept an eye on the states and made sure that their states were not doing anything anti-competitive. I don't think you need, I would shut down the Commerce Department. I mean, basically, what do you need? You need a Defense Department, you need a Justice Department, and you need a Treasury Department. That's it. All other government departments should be shut down. All of them. Health and Human Services, Education, Commerce. God, I can't even, I don't know what else there is. There's a lot. Interior, Energy, all of those should be shut down. The Interior, the only job of the Interior Department should be to sell off all government land and property out there. There's a lot of it. You could do a lot to reduce the debt by selling it. They could start by selling the Bitcoin that they own. Andrew, I want to believe that peaceful discourse can still turn things around to freedom. But the bullies emerging don't respect reason. If not discourse, it will come down to physical fighting. Only a matter of when. So be it. Yep. I mean, that is certainly possible. Ultimately, we could descend into authoritarianism and into physical controls. Ultimately, we will rise from the ashes, whether that will require a revolution or whether that can happen peacefully, hard to tell. But yes, I mean, there is a real challenge, given how mindless so many people are, left and right, how, perceptual level mindlessness They are. It's very hard to see a path to convincing enough people to avoid what seems to be the inevitable descent into authoritarianism. Michael, in regard to these trade wars, why do they want us to be poor? Why don't they want us to be rational, rich, and happy? Well, they don't hold it as they want us to be poor. They hold it as they want to control us. They hold us as this isn't some collectivistic interests. This is an American interest. This is better for us, even though we don't know it. You know, no authoritarian actually says, no, I want you to be poor, I want you to all die. They all claim some mystical knowledge of what is good for America, what is right for America. So they don't, you can't think of it as they want us to be poor, because that's not how they hold it. Not how they hold it. They believe they're being rational. They're not, of course, but they believe they are. Liam, did you see the Gavin Newsom interview with Charlie Cook? No. I can't stand Gavin Newsom, and I can't stand Charlie Cook, and it's a bad combination. But Gavin Newsom, from what I read, shifted dramatically to the right on a lot of the social issues. And, he's running for president in 2028. There's no question about it. So he realizes, as a lot of people in the Democratic Party realize, that they have to move to the right on a lot of these issues, and I think they will. I don't know that Gavin Newsom can convince anybody. He actually believes in that, given his track record. I do think the Democrats are going to have to look for governors who don't have that kind of a track record. You know, again, Shapiro in Pennsylvania comes to mind. There's probably some other Democratic governors who don't have a woke, DI, crazy left track record. I'm not sure who those are, but they probably are few. Otherwise, they wouldn't get reelected, likely. I don't think a New York governor or California governor, given the track record, has a chance of really winning in the U.S. Harper, I noticed Ayn Rand never chose to live in a real American red state. She lived in the bluest of areas, Chicago, New York City, L.A. Well, I mean, Chicago was accidental. That's where her family was. And L.A. she didn't like L.A. L.A. was where her career was. She had to be there for career. The only place she actually chose, the only place she actually wanted to live in is New York City. And that's not because it's blue or red. It's because it was skyscrapers, and it was culture, and it was the energy, and it was the finance center, and it was the economic center of the United States. It was that. Now, why is all of that blue is a good question, right? But look, the reality is, no, she would never wanted to live in a red state. I mean, it's just the culture is not her culture, and back then, the South was racist, and there were racist laws on the book. I mean, she detested all of that, and she would have never wanted to be associated with any of that. Right? She was fully immersed in Western civilization, and Western civilization is not at its best in the South, at least back then. Arguably, there's some cities in the South today that are, but back then it certainly wasn't. The best of the West is indeed represented in California and New York, the most ambitious states, the most productive states, the most innovative states. Where most innovation happens, not that the state of it is innovative. And that has a lot to do with the value of cities. It has a lot to do with the attitude, which is based on the least religious states. New York and California are also the least religious states, at least New York City. That's important. I think it was very important to her. She couldn't have survived surrounded by people who took religion seriously and embedded it into their lives. I don't think she could have survived in that environment. Yeah. James, how do we show people that narcissism isn't selfishness? I had a hard time differentiating the two when I first began to understand objectivism. Yeah, I mean, it is hard because the altruists have done a lot, spent a lot of time, put in a lot of effort to equate the two, to present the two as the same. And what you need to do is unpack that. And to do that, you have to explain what selfishness actually is and what it implies. And the first thing that selfishness really implies is rationality. Reason as a value. And you really have to hammer that home. Selfishness is to be rational. Selfishness is to elevate reason above all else. And then you can ask the question, are the narcissists, do they do that? And I think then it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty clear. So what do selfish people do? They think. They act only based on thought, based on reason. Is that what narcissists do? No. So I think that's where you need to focus. Matt, libertarians hate the West's intervention the same way leftists hate how producers alter the environment. Both come from an anti-life perspective. I agree completely. Completely. In some, yeah, so, libertarians hate the idea that some states are good and some states are evil. And that the good should win. And we should be supported by other good people. So yes, libertarians, because they hate the state. They hate the state. They hate more than anything else good states. Because good states, relatively good states, are a refutation of their entire anarchist ideology. James, we're living in a political climate that rewards narcissistic types who promise magic. Hopefully the business community isn't affected by this mentality. Well, we know it is. We can see it with all the support that Trump got this time from many within the business community. So it clearly is affected. Whether it sticks, whether they'll wake up from the spell, I don't know. But clearly, this magical thinking is starting to dominate our culture. And of course, it's the way all authoritarians come to power. It's always about magical thinking. And this is why religion, religious areas, religious people are the core, the base of any authoritarian. Because they already have as part of their thinking an epistemology of authoritarianism. Not your average algorithm. Do you think Democrats will win huge majorities in the House and Senate in 2026? Will that be good sign for the American sense of life? Do you think Trump will explicitly start ignoring Congress? I don't know, because a lot can happen between now and 2026. I do expect Democrats to win a significant majority in the House. I mean, the Republicans barely have a majority in the House right now. And usually in midterms, the party in opposition wins. And given what's going on with Trump, yes, I think, and given how ineffective Republicans are in the House, I think the Democrats will win the House. The Senate, harder to tell. I don't remember which senators are up in which states. Senate is harder. The country has definitely moved in a Republican direction in terms of the Senate. So many more states are red than blue. The blue states are the most populous, are some of the most populous, largest population states, but they're just most red states. And therefore, since every state gets 2 senators, it doesn't matter who's more populous dated than who. If you have just more states that are red, you're going to get more people in the Senate. So the Senate is going to be hard for Democrats for a generation, unless something really shifts. And it could. It could. I mean, Trump could really piss off a lot of people. Clark, do you see Israel ever going to war with Iran on its own? Potentially. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it keeps getting pushed into the future, and it keeps getting more and more unlikely. And now it could be, if Trump's negotiation with Iran fail, that he lets Israel deal with Iran because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to go to war. There are a lot of scenarios there that could happen. But certainly if Trump negotiates a deal with Iran, he will not let Israel attack Iran independent of that deal. Right? He will elevate the deal above all else. Jacob, say a country seizes Americans' assets. A revolution happens a decade later and a free government is installed. Does the new government owe reparations? I don't know that it owes reparations, no. But what it does is it should repatriate the assets that were stolen. So it doesn't owe above and beyond that a penalty. But it should repatriate the assets, yes. So Nazis stole art. All that art should be returned to whoever owned it when they stole it. Andrew, watch the same conservatives who cheered when Trump withdrew from Obama's Iran deal cheer when Trump makes a deal with Iran. The same contemptible, pragmatic naivete on display. Absolutely. But Trump's deal would be better. It would be the most magnificent, beautiful, amazing, stunning, phenomenal deal in all of human history. It'll be a clear victory, and they'll have every reason to cheer, right? You believe that. Greg says, thanks, Troy. Absolutely. I'll second that. Thank you, Troy. Arum, YBS fans should swarm Destiny's live stream with $5 super chats requesting an interview with Yaron Brook. I did this today. That would be great. Go for it. I mean, Destiny knows who I am. I think he should interview me. It would be a good interaction. We will disagree, but it'll be healthy, and we'll gain massive exposure. So take Arum's advice. Go do it. Normative Randroid. All weapons fair game during war. Yeah, basically. I mean, it has to be strategically and tactically thoughtful. You have to think about, how you want to deploy them. What are the consequences of deploying them? What are the consequences to you? Again, your self-interest. Where's the wind blowing? If it's radioactivity, do you really want to do chemical weapons, biological? Does it give you an advantage? What does it do to the morale of your own soldiers? Can it blow back on you? So a lot of things have to be thought out. Is the enemy then going to use these? But yes, morality doesn't really say anything in war about how you kill the bad guy, what mechanism you use to kill him. Jacob says, invade the USSR after World War II, like Patton suggested. I don't know that was necessary. Look, the earlier they would have listened to Patton, the earlier the war would have been over, and the easier it would have been to America to just take Eastern Europe from the Germans and then tell the Russians, this is, you don't get, even though we promised you in Malta, Eastern Europe, you're not going to get it. That's what should have been done. I've told the story about Patton could have taken Czechoslovakia way before the Russians ever got there, and they should have allowed him to do that, and should have told the Russians to go stuff it. Once they'd split Europe into two, and there was an agreement, and I don't know that I'm not sure at that point they should have invaded USSR. What they should have done, again, not go to war with Russia, but they should have sped up the conquest of Western Europe, which they could have done if Patton was in charge, or if Patton was left alone, and being able to take most of Eastern Europe that landed up in the hands of the USSR could have been saved from being oppressed under the communists. And they should have done that. But I don't think going to war with the USSR, I mean, again, the purpose of that would have been to save Eastern Europeans. As part of the war against Germany, they could have done it. Andrew, I heard that the car makers told Trump that cars were going to be 12,000 more expensive if the tariffs went into effect this week. How is that going to change by April 2nd? It's not. There's nothing they can do by April 2nd that is going to change that. They can't change the supply chain in order to reduce that, maybe by small margins. But basically, that's the case. I don't know if that's numbers real or just to scare Trump. But yeah, everything's gonna be more expensive, and unbelievably stupid because these auto companies have designed their supply chain to be as efficient and productive as possible under the belief that zero tariffs on car parts with Canada and Mexico was going to be with us forever. And changing that arbitrarily for no reason is a massive violation of the rights of the car manufacturers, a massive violation of the rights of American business. Just unthinkable. Just unthinkable. Normative Android, do you agree with Worcester versus Georgia when Justin Marshall made the Cherokee a sovereign nation within the United States? Was Jackson wrong to move the Cherokee by ignoring the decision? So I do not agree with Justice Marshall, and I do not agree with Jackson. I think they were all wrong in the way they dealt with the Indians. The Indians everything should have been done to encourage the Indians to be integrated into American society. Everything should have been done to treat Indians as individuals and not as tribes. Everything should have been done to secure property rights for individual Indians. And that property should have been valuable property, not just take them to the most godforsaken place and drop there. But it should have been done whether they wanted to or not. It should have been, what they should have gotten is literal deeds on the land. And then if they decide to burn that and return to violence, then you have to kill them. You have to deal with the violence. Put them in jail, the equivalent of jail. But there was no attempt, particularly as we moved west, to deal with Indians not as nations, not as collectives, but as individuals. And to this day, Indians do not have property rights within the reservations. The Indian nation has property rights, whatever the hell that means. So Indians have no property rights. Whatever wealth there is in the land or whatever goes to the nation. And Indians are still treated as wards of the state. And the way the American treats the American Indians is an absolute unmitigated disgrace. It is a violation of the very basic principles of this country. And it's horrific. It's horrific how they were treated in the 19th century. And it's even more horrific than in the 21st century. We continue to treat them that way. The Indian nation should be carved up. Every member of the Indian nation should be given a plot of land. And the nation should be dissolved. And they should become full citizens of the United States with property rights over parts of what is now Indian nation stuff. And they should get a deed for that property and figure out how to best utilize it. But that should have been done, 150 years ago. Lyron, when should the U.S. annex territory? Should we incorporate countries that want to join the U.S.? Sure, I think we should be open to others joining. I think the only time to annex are two scenarios. One is somebody voluntarily wants to come in. And second, a war in which, I don't know if we went to war with Mexico, war with Canada, and you could imagine annexing the territory that we occupied. But we shouldn't go to war as an aggressor. Imagine one of those countries attacked the United States. Hard to believe. Then in fighting them, in protecting ourselves, in self-defense, we occupy territory, we could annex that territory, which has basically happened in the American-Mexico wars. Wars I'm not sure who started, so I'm not going to say that they were legit, but I don't know who started them. Esoteric dichotomy. Hey, Yaron, do you like cruises? No, not particularly. I mean, I've only been on one, which was a small cruise ship. It was a Windstar with a big sail, small and really, really nice, luxurious. But the idea of going onto one of those massive cruise ships with 1,000 people or several thousand people and buffets and lots of people and no appeal to me. Zilch appeal. I mean, I can imagine a small cruise doing the Galapagos Island. If I did them again, last time we were at a hotel on one of the islands and then did excursions to others, I would actually prefer doing it on a cruise on a small boat and every night sleeping off of a different island and then going and checking it out. I wouldn't mind doing the Greek islands again on a cruise ship, a small one. But that's about it. I'm just not, Plus, I don't like getting seasick. In a car, follow-up question. Is there a connection how oversimplified process of manufacturing clothes offshore and oversimplified current style? No, I don't think so. I think the style drives the production. I think the fact that this is what we want, it's kind of what we get. It's also true that we don't want to spend a lot of money on clothes. I mean, it's very easy for Americans to allocate a little bit more money for clothes and get better fitting clothes if they wanted to. And then production would change to adapt to our demand. But we don't want to spend a lot of money on clothes. We don't care that much about it. And I think as a consequence, production produces what we want. So Bricks and Coal, nationalism feels like a coping mechanism for the unskilled and unproductive. I think it's a coping mechanism for the unthinking. Because there's some productive and skilled people who are nationalists. But I think it's for the people who are basically unthinking, who don't want to take responsibility for their own lives, who don't understand what is necessary in order to achieve their own values and their own goals. That's who gravitates, I think, ultimately to nationalism, the unthinking. All right, last question, it looks like. Jesper from Norway. I've listened to every single show since 2023. Wow. And I would like to thank you for noticeably changing my thinking. Regards from a student and objectivist in Bergen, Norway. Thank you. You should invite me to Bergen to speak at your university. One year, I got 2 invitations from Bergen and went to Bergen twice to give talks. And I actually did a talk, one of my favorite talks, was in Bergen. It was at the Student Union at Bergen. And I gave a talk on the evils of the Scandinavian welfare state. But if you could get some student group in Bergen, Norway, to invite me to give a talk, let's say in the fall, in October, that would be fantastic. Bergen is a beautiful, beautiful place. I don't mind visiting again. September, October, that would be great. Normative Android. With respect to foreign policy, do you have a favorite American president? What about historical figure? Oh, I don't know. Nobody in the 20th century. Literally nobody. I mean, at the end of the day, FDR did a pretty good job. But it certainly wouldn't be a favorite. God. Yeah, and I don't know enough about 19th century presidents to tell. So I don't know enough. So no, I don't have one. Sorry. We'd have to ask an American history expert. I mean, Jefferson was good. He terminated the pirates, but he also spent a lot of taxpayer money on buying the Louisiana Territory, which turned out to be an amazing deal. But was it appropriate in terms of the role of government? Difficult to say. Andrew Traeger, how would you evaluate the state of the intellectuals of the freedom movement compared to earlier this century or any time period you choose? Well, I don't think the freedom movement has the kind of giants that they had in the past. I mean, where is the Milton Friedman of today? Where's the Hayek or the Mises? Never mind the Ayn Rand. I just think it's of generally lower caliber, and fewer who dramatically stand out. They're good people out there. They're good economists. They're good spokesmen for various aspects of the freedom movement. But we don't have the giants that we had back then. It's larger today. So there are many, many more people involved. But fewer people who stand out as exceptional. And maybe it's because the freedom movement is very fragmented, can't agree on anything. Maybe that's why. So nobody coalesces a bunch of people around him. And Milton Friedman had a big following even outside of what you'd call the liberty movement, in the freedom movement in among conservatives. He did a PBS TV show. I mean, he was a public intellectual of I don't think anybody comes close. Maybe Tyler Cowen, but Tyler Cowen is not associated with freedom and liberty necessarily. He's not as clear and sharp and unequivocal as Milton Friedman was on many issues. So I think that's the best I can do. There are more of them, fewer geniuses, fewer amazing public intellectuals who capture the imagination of the culture the way Friedman did. The way even Hayek and Mises, I don't think, did in that sense, but he was such a giant. I mean, who's written books like Mises? Who's innovated in economics like Mises? And then taught generation after generation after generation of economists. So they're just not there. Ali says, just feeling good today, $50. Thank you, Ali. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the support. That is fantastic. Thank you, guys. Thanks for the support. Thanks to all the super chatters. And I will see you guys Monday. We'll have two shows, usually as Monday. And Monday evening is Greg. Greg Salmieri's back. So prepare all your philosophy questions. He has a lot to say about Trump as well, so prepare all your Trump questions. Just prepare a bunch of questions. Greg is amazing. He knows so much. He is so well-spoken. He always has a great perspective. But yeah, all the questions you're not satisfied about how I answered them, bring them on to Greg. Let's and particularly the philosophical ones. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a lot of fun. Greg is always fun. And we'll have a news show earlier in the day. So 2 shows. Remember, the clocks change. My clock doesn't change. So whereas right now I'm an hour ahead of East Coast time, starting tomorrow I am on East Coast time, and that changes my schedule quite a bit. So I don't right now know exactly what time the shows are going to be. Are they going to be the same time Puerto Rican time, which means an hour later for you, or will they be the same time East Coast time, which means an hour earlier for me? I have to work that out for the next week. The week after next, I start my March travels, and everything goes to the wind. So, and I'll be in Europe, and I'll be in Israel, and I'm traveling quite a bit. So we will see how things go in March, April, May, are travel-heavy months. Travel-heavy months. All right, guys. I will see you all Monday. Have a great Sunday, great weekend. Yeah. See ya. Bye.